Please, water. What a kid did next blew his mind. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a merciless sun, its cracked earth baking in the midday heat. The air shimmered, thick with the kind of warmth that could sear your skin. Jack Larson, a high-flying CEO of a mining empire, was a man who once commanded boardrooms and shaped economies. Now, he was nothing, a captive tied to a twisted, gnarled tree, his tailored suit torn and caked with dust. His wrists burned from coarse ropes. His lips were cracked, and his throat felt like sandpaper. Kidnappers had stripped him of his wealth, his power, and his dignity, leaving him to die in this forsaken place. Sweat stung his eyes as he fought to stay conscious, his hope fading with every passing minute. Then, through the haze, he saw her, a small figure emerging from behind a cluster of brittle scrub. Sophie, a 7-year-old girl, moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned to survive where others wouldn't. Her bare feet, toughened by years without shoes, barely flinched on the scorching ground. Her clothes were a patchwork of hand-me-downs, faded and too big, hanging off her scrawny frame. Her skin was bronzed by the relentless sun, and her dark eyes, sharp and wary, carried the weight of a life no child should know. Sophie had no family, no home, just the desert and her wits. She scavenged for bottles to trade, dodged adults who tried to drag her to shelters, and slept in hidden corners where no one could find her. That day, she was hunting for scraps near a dusty road, hoping for a discarded can or a crust of bread. Instead, she spotted Jack, slumped against the tree, his head lolling. At first, she thought he was dead, another body the desert had claimed. She'd seen them before, drifters or junkies who didn't make it. But then he stirred, his voice cutting through the silence like a rusty blade. "Water, please," he rasped, barely able to lift his head. Sophie froze, her heart thudding. Strangers were trouble. She'd learned that young men like him, even ones who looked broken, could be dangerous. Her first instinct was to bolt, to vanish into the brush and forget she'd ever seen him. But something in his voice, raw, desperate, made her pause. She stepped closer, keeping a safe distance, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" she called, her voice sharp but cautious. Jack Larson," he managed, his words slurring from dehydration. The name meant nothing to Sophie. CEOs, billionaires, corporate games, she didn't know that world. To her, he was just a man, tied up and dying. Jack's story spilled out in fragments. Kidnapped, betrayed, left here because his enemies thought someone would pay to save him. No one had. Sophie's mind raced. Walk away, and he's gone by sundown. Help him, and she might regret it. She'd survived by trusting no one. But a tiny part of her, buried deep, wanted to do something good. Just this once. "Fine, I'll get water," she said, her tone hard but not cruel. "But don't try anything, or I'm out of here." Jack nodded weakly, his head slumping. Sophie darted into the scrub, leaving Jack, a man who'd once had everything, at the mercy of a kid who had nothing. She returned with a plastic bottle of murky water, warm and gritty from a stash she'd hidden under a rock. To Jack, it was a miracle. He grabbed it with trembling hands, gulping greedily, some dribbling down his chin. Sophie stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching him like a hawk. "Why's a guy like you out here in a fancy suit?" she asked, her suspicion clear. Jack wiped his mouth, struggling to sit up. "I ran a company," he muttered. "Big business. People wanted what I had, money, power." Sophie snorted, unimpressed. Rich people always got enemies. She didn't understand his world, but she knew trouble. The desert taught her that. She studied him, her eyes flicking to the ropes still binding his legs. "Want me to cut you loose?" she asked, surprising herself. Jack blinked, stunned. "If you can, but be careful, the ropes are tight." From her tattered bag, Sophie pulled a small knife with a red plastic handle. Its blade nicked but sharp. She'd swiped it from a market years ago. Kept it for protection. "This cuts better than anything," she said, a faint smirk breaking through her guarded expression. She knelt, slicing through the ropes with steady hands, her movements precise despite her age. Jack watched, floored. This kid, barely tall enough to reach his chest, handled a knife like she'd been born with it. As the ropes fell away, he rubbed his raw wrists, the marks deep and purple. "Thanks," he said, his voice heavy with gratitude. You'd be dead otherwise, Sophie replied, blunt as ever. No one lasts out here without water. Not you. Not me. The desert wind kicked up, swirling dust around them. They sat in the tree's meager shade, an uneasy silence settling in. Jack, still weak, didn't know what to say. Sophie had done her part. She didn't owe him anything else. But Jack broke the quiet. Got a place to stay tonight? Sophie shot him a look like he'd lost his mind. I got my spot. It's mine, not yours. Her tone was sharp, defensive, like a wall slamming down. Jack didn't push. Her honesty, raw and unfiltered, hit him hard. She wasn't like the polished executives or fake friends in his old life, no pretense. Just truth. She'd survived by trusting no one. And he couldn't blame her. What's Jack feeling? Saved by a kid who's got nothing. Will this change him? Drop your thoughts below. Jack struggled to his feet, his legs wobbly from days of hunger and heat. Sophie was already moving, her bare feet gliding over the cracked earth like she owned the desert. Jack stumbled behind, his polished shoes useless on the rough terrain. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man who'd once brokered multi-million-dollar deals, now trailing a 7-year-old who knew more about survival than he ever would. His old life, private jets, penthouse suites, felt like a distant memory, unreachable in this harsh, unforgiving place. Sophie didn't care about his pain or his past. She moved with purpose, leading him to an old pickup truck half buried in a sand dune. Its rusted frame groaned as Jack climbed inside. Wincing from the effort, Sophie tossed a pile of ragged blankets in a corner and plopped down, her small frame barely taking up space. Here, she said, tossing him a half-eaten apple and another bottle of cloudy water. Eat. You're no good if you're weak. Jack caught the apple, his hands still shaky, as he bit into its bruised flesh. A realization hit him. Sophie wasn't just surviving, she was a force, thriving in a world that didn't care if she lived or died. Her sharp eyes watched him, like she was testing if he was worth her time. Jack wanted to ask about her life, how she ended up alone, what hardened her so young, but her guarded vibe stopped him. Instead, he started talking about his own, the company he'd built, the betrayal by colleagues who'd sold him out. He didn't expect her to care, but he needed to say it, to make sense of how he'd ended up here. I don't care. Sophie cut in, her voice slicing through his words. Your fancy life means nothing out here. What matters is what's next. Her bluntness stung, but she was right. His wealth, his status, useless in the desert. He was just a guy. And she was his only shot. Silence settled again, heavy and tense. Then Jack asked, do you ever think there's more to life than just getting by? Sophie stared at the truck's rusted wall, her face hard. After a long pause, she whispered, getting by is all I know. Always has been. Her words hit Jack like a freight train. He'd had everything, money, power, and still ended up here. She'd had nothing, yet she was the one keeping them alive. As the sun dipped low, casting an eerie orange glow over the desert, they kept moving. Sophie's pace was relentless, her small frame cutting through the landscape like she'd memorized every rock and dune. Jack's body screamed for rest, but he pushed on, knowing stopping wasn't an option. Suddenly, Sophie froze, her hand shooting up. Jack's heart raced. What? He whispered, his voice barely audible. They're close, she said, her eyes scanning the horizon. A white van crept along a dirt road, its engine a low hum in the still air. Jack's stomach dropped. That's them, he hissed. The ones who took me. Sophie didn't flinch. They won't stop till they find you. And they don't care who gets hurt. Her calm scared Jack more than the van. She grabbed his hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and pulled him behind a crumbling shack. They crouched in the shadows, holding their breath as the van rolled past. Two men sat inside, their eyes scanning the desert with cold precision. Jack's pulse pounded, but Sophie was steady, like she'd dodged danger 100 times before. Now what? Jack whispered, his voice shaking. Move fast. Stay quiet, Sophie said, her tone flat but firm. If we're lucky, they're gone. The van moved on, its taillights fading into the dusk. But the danger lingered. Jack knew his life was in Sophie's hands now. What's Sophie's next move? Will Jack make it out alive? Share your thoughts below. They spent the night in the shack, its splintered walls barely shielding them from the desert's chill. Jack couldn't sleep, his mind racing. The man who'd once controlled empires was now a fugitive, relying on a kid who'd seen more hardship than he could fathom. Sophie curled up in a corner, her knife clutched close, her breathing steady but alert. Jack watched her, marveling at her resilience. How had she survived so long alone? What had the world done to make her so tough, so guarded? By morning, they were on the move again, sticking to hidden paths Sophie seemed to know by heart. Jack's body ached, but he didn't complain, she wouldn't care anyway. As they trekked, he started to see the desert through her eyes, every rock a potential hiding spot, every shadow a threat. She taught him to listen for distant engines, to spot tracks in the sand. He was a student, and she was the master. They stopped at a dry creek bed, where Sophie dug up a buried tin with a few crackers and a candy bar. She split them evenly, her movements methodical. Eat slow, she said, makes it last. Jack nodded, humbled. He'd dined in Michelin-star restaurants. But this stale cracker, shared by a kid with nothing, felt like a gift. As they ate, Jack tried again to connect. How'd you end up out here? He asked, keeping his tone soft. Sophie's eyes darkened. Doesn't matter, she snapped. I'm here, that's it. Her walls were up, but Jack saw a flicker of pain behind them. He didn't push. Instead, he told her more about his life, not the glitz, but the mistakes, the greed that made enemies. He wasn't sure why he opened up, but her silence felt like permission to keep going. She didn't respond, but she listened, her eyes fixed on the horizon. For Sophie, trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But Jack's honesty, raw, unpolished, felt different from the empty promises she'd heard before. Days passed, each one a test of endurance. The van appeared again, forcing them to hide in a shallow cave. Sophie's quick thinking kept them safe. But Jack knew the danger was closing in. He contacted his old friend, Rachel, a crisis manager from his corporate days. Over a stolen burner phone, he told her about Sophie, her courage, her loneliness. She needs a home, he said. I want to give her one. Rachel was skeptical. You? Adopt a kid? You're not exactly father material. Jack, I wasn't, he admitted, but she's changing that. Jack's decision to adopt Sophie wasn't just about gratitude, it was about redemption. He'd spent years chasing profit, ignoring the human cost. Sophie, with her knife and her grit, showed him what mattered, but the road ahead was daunting. Sophie had no records, no birth certificate, no proof she existed. The system didn't know her, and she didn't trust it. Rachel connected Jack with Maria, a family lawyer known for fighting for kids like Sophie. They set up camp in a small motel on the edge of a dusty town, where Jack and Sophie could lie low. Maria dove into the legal maze, filing petitions and tracking down social workers. Jack paid for everything, his wealth finally useful, but Sophie stayed distant, her eyes wary during every meeting. She'd been through foster homes, cold, temporary places that promised safety and delivered betrayal. Why's this different? She asked one night, her voice barely a whisper as they sat on the motel's sagging couch. Jack knelt to her level, his voice steady. Because I'm not giving up on you. Not now. Not ever. He meant it, but her silence told him she wasn't convinced. The legal battle dragged on. Maria uncovered fragments of Sophie's past, born to a mother who vanished, shuffled through shelters, then left to fend for herself. No one had claimed her. No one had cared. Jack testified about their meeting, about her saving his life. Social workers visited, their clipboards and questions making Sophie tense. She barely spoke, her knife always close, a reminder of the walls she'd built. One afternoon, in Maria's cramped office, the moment arrived. Adoption papers sat on the desk, crisp and official. Sophie stared at them, her small hands trembling. Jack watched, his heart in his throat. She'd resisted every step, scared to trust again. Foster homes had broken her faith, adults had broken her heart. But as she picked up the pen, something shifted. Her signature, shaky, uneven, was more than a name. It was a choice, a tiny step toward believing in something more. Jack's eyes stung. Thank you, he whispered, his voice cracking. You've made me the happiest guy alive. Sophie didn't speak, but when she looked up, a glimmer in her eyes hinted at hope, a fragile, new thing. The months after were messy. Sophie had nightmares, locking herself in her room some days. Jack learned to be patient, to listen when she was ready. He rented a house in a quiet town, far from the desert's dangers. Sophie started school, her first real one, and made a friend, a girl who loved drawing as much as she did. Jack hung her sketches on the fridge, each one a sign she was healing. For Jack, the man who'd once chased power, this was his true legacy, giving Sophie a home, a family, a chance to be a kid. He kept her old knife in a drawer, a reminder of the girl who'd saved him, and the life they were building together.